3 signs in the silence of the monastery. The moon slipped through the narrow tower windows and lit up the cold stones where the shadows whispered. The monastery grounds smelled of dust and rain, and above the roofs the wind growled dully, as if a dark guardian were protecting an ancient amulet. Anara walked along the corridors in the same pattern of steps as people who are used to the clatter of their own thoughts walk, in an even rhythm, without stopping, without unnecessary questions. Her name was Anara. Her path was a tiny trail between a forgotten past and sealed-off secrets. She had never considered herself a seeker of mysteries until she discovered the first mark, an amulet hidden in the wall under the violet glow of candles. Soon, she stopped in front of a dark door that, though it had neither key or lock, bore a braided rope, like a sign that demanded permission. On the door were 3 symbols, carved by the chisel of ancient gestures: a kite with spread wings, a branch that split into a pattern of threads, and a stone head carved with silent sorrow. "This place is calling me," Anara whispered, as if confirming a decision rather than trying to pronounce a name. She touched one of the sharp lines on the branch, and the air in the corridor stirred with cold dust. The earth under her feet trembled softly, and for a moment it was as if invisible water shot through the wall. The 3 symbols began to whisper, not aloud, but in the memory of her attention. Each of them carried not just an image, but a memory, past, present, and future in a single pattern, as if the 3 times existed in a tight bundle that could be torn apart only by a name. The warm light that had only recently seeped in disappeared, leaving Anara in half-darkness. In this dimness, she saw something that seemed no more than a mirage. A lamp on the wall lit up by itself, though there was no visible source of fuel. The bulb, like a living eye, looked at her. Its eyes had a strange color, a blend of amber and icy blue. "The stone will awaken," said a voice from the darkness, and she realized she was not alone. But the voice did not belong to a human. It sounded like a soft hum of water that had suddenly turned into words. Anara turned, but there was no one in the corridor, only the sound of rain outside the monastery and the gleam of candles. Her fingers found in her pocket a small note she had discovered in the diary of her old mentor, back when she didn't yet know what it was for. On the paper were words written with a fine quill, 3 symbols, to learn the name of the past. But the name of the past had been forgotten. The surroundings began to hint. In the monastery chronicles, there was mention of 3 amulets that hold 3 times, and only when they are united can the stone that peeps the mute voice of time gain a name. Anara knew this was no mere myth. It was a path that could lead to the unraveling of her own fate, and perhaps to answers to questions she had been afraid to ask. She slowly approached the stone slab beneath the candle. 3 more symbols were carved into the slab, but now they looked different, like living lines that pulsed beneath the skin of the stone. She pressed her palm against the slab. At that moment, she felt her breathing synchronize with the rhythm of the stone, as if she had become part of some great tree where every branch was a kiss of time. "The name of the past is needed," she whispered, as if uttering a spell. The voice of the stone answered her in the silence, but only as an echo, as when wind brushes an empty hall. The name had been forgotten, but it had not disappeared. The chapter ended with Anara closing her eyes and allowing memory to pass through her like wind passes between old towers. She felt that her own story was somewhere in there, inside the threefold weave, and that she had to make a choice: turn at the next door to continue her journey, or stay and examine the traces of the past, as if they could show her the road to tomorrow. She slowly approached the stone slab beneath the candle. 3 more symbols were carved into the slab, but now they looked different, like living lines that pulsed beneath the skin of the stone. She pressed her palm against the slab. At that moment, she felt her breathing synchronized with the rhythm of the stone, as if she had become part of some great tree where every branch was a kiss of time. "The name of the past is needed," she whispered, as if uttering a spell. The voice of the stone answered her in the silence, but only as an echo, as when wind brushes an empty hall. The name had been forgotten, but it had not disappeared. The chapter ended with Inara closing her eyes and allowing memory to pass through her like wind passes between old towers. She felt that her own story was somewhere in there, inside the threefold weave, and that she had to make a choice: turn at the next door to continue her journey, or stay and examine the traces of the past, as if they could show her the road to tomorrow. She stepped through the door, and the corridor, as if breathing, closed behind her with the heavy whisper of stone. Luminous drops, like tiny white swallows, clung to the walls and dripped onto the floor, leaving a cold trail. Inara felt the night behind her back spreading over her shoulders, but ahead lurked another night, the one that hid its answers behind solid shadow. Doors pierced by narrow beams of candlelight opened each minute to their own rhythm. Somewhere, a soft ringing was heard, not of metal and not of glass, but the smell of ancient words that seemed to be stored in the air like dust on fields. She descended the steps. Each one seemed to repeat her step, an echo deep into memory, and at the same time deep into the steps of a story not yet written. Before her opened a room with a ceiling that stretched upward like the sky over forgotten cities. In the center stood a table of black stone, on which lay a map woven from the thinnest threads of light. She didn't think about it. The map found her gaze itself. The lines, curving, formed a path to those places where time paused ever so slightly to listen to a human being. "Memory likes to show roads to those who know how to listen," whispered a voice that belonged to no one, yet sounded in Inara's chest like a warmth she had once known. She reached out and touched the threads of light. The map shivered, and symbols flared on its surface. Symbols she had known since childhood, though she had never known their names. Triplets bound together like three knots, one after another, yet inseparable. "The name of the past is not the only key," said the voice, babbling by her ear, "but it can open the door to that which has not yet taken solid form." From the depths of the room floated a faint whisper, like the crackling of a hearth fire. Where before there had been an empty space, a portrait of a woman appeared. In the pitch-black darkness, it was alive, with eyes that did not follow Inara, but looked into another time. She recognized her by the scar that ran from her cheek down to her jaw, a family mark that flared for an instant and faded. "You are seeking a road," said the woman through the portrait, though her voice spoke directly in Inara's head, like an old song motif returning to memory. "But the road does not lead into the future unless you first hear the whisper of the past. Listen, Inara, because the name is not just forgotten, it has changed its place." The wall beside her suddenly receded, letting through a thin strip of light, beyond which shimmered a long corridor. In it stood doors, each with an etched symbol of the given path: a hand, a leaf, a grain. Signs she had known since childhood, yet never knew how they were connected. She approached one of the doors, and the symbol upon it instantly stirred like a living wound. The doorframe quivered, and from it flowed a narrow path of light toward the center of the hall. "If you want to go further, don't be afraid to pay the price for an answer," said the voice, and at that moment, Inara felt her heart grow both lighter and heavier, because she understood. Every step forward was another part of her own story that she would have to accept. She slowly placed her palm on the thread-like map again. The symbols on the map trembled, chose a path, and reflected it in her eyes. It led not to a place, but to a time that had not yet happened, but already existed within her. She knew that the road to tomorrow began with accepting forgotten names, and with the awareness that these names had the power to change the very fabric of what she considered her life. The chapter ended with Anara stepping onto the glowing path and feeling the walls behind her begin to contract again, as if pulling her back to the threshold of a decision, to move forward and take charge of what had already awakened in her heart, or to stop and give memory yet another chance to hide in the dark before showing her the road to tomorrow. Anara emerged into a narrow archway where the air smelled of ash and the heat of memories. The threads of light she had been following scattered for a moment and rustled in her ears like the pages of old journals. But within a second, they drew together again into a soft path beneath her soles, as if the air itself were supporting her step. Before her opened a hall she did not remember from any map of her paths. Its ceiling was high, and the walls seemed to breathe. Each minute gave them a new sheen and aged them into another pattern. In the center lay a source of light, a sphere within which tiny sparks floated, like mice of light leaping between moments. Anara approached and heard within herself a voiceless voice, like an echo from the depths of a well she had once feared to fill with her own questions. "Do not fear silence," the voice whispered, and Anara felt a thin veil of calm settle over her heart. She understood. Here she could ask, but she didn't have to receive an answer at once. Here she could stop and listen without blaming herself for the answer's delay. Her gaze fell on a window in the far corner of the hall. Beyond the glass shimmered outlines of cities from her past. The streets where she had played as a child, the markets where she had learned to sell her doubts, and the house where she had first felt she might be strong. Yet the glass was fragile. Every moment it began to crack, and from its cracks poured new images into her, faces of those she had once left behind, and those she had not yet met. "Remember," whispered the inner voice, "memory is not a thief, but the keeper of the path." Anara closed her eyes and allowed the threads of the past to gather around her again, but now they did not try to hold her back. They became guides, pointing her toward new steps. It became clear, the past is not a prison, but a map, each fragment a point on the route, each mistake a turn in the trail. She approached the source of light and split the sphere with her gaze, not to destroy it, but to see what lay within. Sparks flared at the center, and each turned into a tiny scene from long-forgotten moments. The laughter of a close friend, her first doubtful look at her own strength, a soft whisper of support in times of weakness. Together, they formed a single heart finding its rhythm. "Leave part of the past not as a burden, but as a compass," the voice repeated. Anara nodded and felt how the threads of memory she had clung to for so long now held her not in negativity, but in balance. She understood that strength lay not in forgetting, but in choosing which moments would guide her into tomorrow. Mastering her tremor, she stepped toward the exit, where the air became lighter, almost like after rain. Behind the door awaited a thin, cold wall of light, a field of possibilities. She reached out her hand and touched it. The wall withdrew, opening a new passage. There was silence within, but not emptiness. It held Anara's future voice, the voice of her own decisions. She did not know where the passage led, but already sensed a quiet confidence in it. Step by step, she went into the unknown, not forgetting the threads she had chosen to keep, not as shackles, but as compass and map. The depth of her gaze became clearer, and every step sounded like a promise to herself. Tomorrow might be harder, but she would go where her inner voice could be heard, where her past would become a step toward a new beginning. Suddenly, silence stopped Anara, not emptiness, but a neat, almost detailed drawing of the space around her. She stood on the threshold between two worlds, the one that held her past and the one that offered a brightly lit future. But now silence spoke, not with emptiness, but with a promise. Every step forward would be accompanied by clarity of choice. Before her appeared a figure, not a person, but the image of her own strength. The eyes in Anara's likeness looked straight into her heart, and she felt her inner fire ignite again. This fire did not burn, it illuminated. It showed which threads of the past truly served her and which could be released without pain, so as not to spill herself away. Do not be afraid to be yourself in this whole world of possibilities, said a voice she already knew, but now heard anew. Strength need not burden. It can become a wing that carries you beyond your old limits. And Nara stepped forward, and each step resonated deep within her heart with true harmony. Her decisions ceased to be attempts to guess the future. They became conscious actions that shaped a new pattern of life. She saw that old wounds did not vanish, but turned into familiar, warm places on the map of her path, places where she could stop and remember where she had come from in order to understand where she was going. On the wall before her, a map appeared. Marked on it were key moments of her journey, the choices that had already made her stronger, and those she still had to make. The map gave no answers, but it gave direction, to move toward the light of her inner voice, following it rather than the noise of outside voices. The 5th chapter ended with Nara feeling a slight tingling at her wrist, a sign that her energy had begun to flow into a more stable stream. She raised her head and saw on the horizon a thin boundary between the familiar world and what awaited her ahead. She smiled and walked on, knowing that the future was already beginning here and now, in every choice she would make next. The light that had once seemed only a bright point in the distance gradually began to resemble a road along which Nara could walk blindfolded and still not stumble. She approached a stone archway, beyond which roared the ocean of her thoughts, powerful, inexhaustible, like a tide that returns strength to those who can listen to its rhythm. She felt her breathing grow steadier, each inhale bringing a new meaning with it. Before Nara stretched a valley of possibilities, not so much a space for choice as a space for understanding what forces drove her decisions. She recalled the words of an old mentor, "Do not seek a path in advance, seek a direction." The direction was clear: walk toward the light of her inner voice, without forgetting the shadow those impressions that had shaped her character and given her the strength to be genuine. Resilient earth cushioned the soles of her boots, and she felt beneath her a rhythm like an ancient dance of time. In that rhythm, she saw images from past events, not as a burden, but as knots in chains that could be untied to move more freely. Every knot on the skin of memory spoke to her of what she had been through and of how those experiences could become tools for her future actions. Suddenly, the map she had seen on the wall stirred behind her back. It had changed. Its lines grew softer, its perspectives clearer. A new direction had appeared toward those places where her presence could bring real help to other people. She understood that strength lay not in controlling the fate of the entire world, but in the ability to bring light where it was darkest. Nara took her first step along the new trail and paused to listen to the small sounds around her: the knock of branches, the rustle of stones, the rare click of a tiny bird. Those sounds became her compass. They showed that the little things in life were the true signs of the way. She decided not to postpone what mattered, not to wait for the perfect moment. The moment had already come, here and now. Her eyes reflected the distant horizon where sky and sea met in a supple line of light. She smiled, feeling that her fear of the unknown had grown smaller than her desire to move forward. In her hands rang a small amulet strap she had worn since childhood, a symbol of connection with those who had believed in her before and those who believe in her now. It reminded her of her duty to herself and to those she could still support. With these thoughts, Nara stepped into a new chapter, where each decision was no race against time, but a deliberate creation of her own future. She knew ahead lay trials, but also new discoveries. Ahead lay choices, but also the clarity that awaits those who are ready to listen to the voice within. And she was ready.